Syria stands at a crossroads. After decades of iron-fisted rule, Bashar al-Assad's regime has crumbled. The country is in ruins, scarred by years of brutal civil war. Yet, amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope emerges. The Syrian people, known for their resilience, dare to dream of a brighter future. The road ahead will be long and arduous, fraught with challenges and uncertainties. The international community watches with bated breath, its role crucial in shaping the fate of this war-torn nation. The future of Syria hangs in the balance. The power vacuum left by Assad's departure has created a dangerous void, one that various factions are vying to fill. The country is fragmented, with different regions controlled by opposing groups. The specter of further violence and instability looms large. The international community faces a pivotal moment. The decisions made today will have far-reaching consequences for Syria's future. Will the world rise to the challenge and help rebuild this shattered nation? Or will Syria remain mired in conflict and chaos? Only time will tell. However, one thing is certain: the Syrian people deserve a chance at peace and a brighter future. The news reverberated around the world. Bashar al-Assad was gone. The announcement sent shockwaves through international communities, with reactions ranging from disbelief to cautious optimism. After clinging to power for over 2 decades, the Syrian president's reign had finally come to an end. His tenure was marked by a brutal civil war, widespread human rights abuses, and a country left in ruins. His ousting came not from foreign intervention, but from within. The Syrian people, exhausted by years of conflict and oppression, had risen up to reclaim their nation. Rebel forces, spearheaded by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, stormed Damascus, seizing control of the capital and sending Assad fleeing to Moscow under the protection of his longtime ally, Russia. The dramatic scenes of rebels entering the city were broadcast worldwide. The fall of Damascus triggered an outpouring of emotion across Syria, particularly in the capital itself. The streets, once filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions, now echoed with cheers and celebrations. Jubilant crowds flooded the streets, their cries of celebration echoing through the war-torn city. It was a moment of collective joy and relief, a rare respite from the years of suffering. The Syrian independence flag, a symbol of unity and defiance, flew high above. It was a powerful image, representing the hopes and dreams of a nation longing for peace and stability. For many, it was a moment they never thought they would live to see. The older generation in particular had endured decades of hardship and repression. Yet, beneath the euphoria, a current of uncertainty ran deep. The future was unclear, and the challenges ahead were daunting. Assad's departure left a gaping power vacuum, and the question of who would fill it remained unanswered. The country was at a crossroads with many different factions vying for control. The rebel forces were a diverse mix, united in their opposition to Assad but divided on their vision for the future. Each group had its own agenda, its own idea of what Syria should become. The specter of infighting and further instability loomed large. The possibility of a new conflict, this time among the rebels themselves, was a real and present danger. The international community watched with cautious optimism. World leaders knew that the fall of Assad was just the beginning of a long and complex process. The fall of Assad presented an opportunity for peace, but it was a fragile one. Diplomatic efforts were underway to bring all parties to the negotiating table. The world knew that the real work had just begun. Rebuilding a nation torn apart by years of war would require immense effort and resources. Rebuilding Syria, healing its wounds, and guiding it towards a stable and democratic future would be a monumental task, one that would require international cooperation and unwavering commitment. The road ahead was long, but the hope for a better future kept the spirit of the Syrian people alive. Assad's departure revealed a Syria deeply fractured, a nation torn apart by years of relentless conflict and civil war. Years of brutal conflict had carved the nation into a patchwork of territories, each controlled by different factions with their own agendas and ambitions. These divisions were not just geographical but also ideological, with each group vying for dominance and control. The north, a region with a significant Kurdish population, remained under the control of the Syrian Democratic Forces. This area had become a stronghold for Kurdish aspirations, where they sought to establish a degree of autonomy and self-governance. Backed by the United States, the SDF had been instrumental in the fight against ISIS and were now seeking autonomy for their region. Their collaboration with U.S. forces had not only bolstered their military capabilities, but also their political standing in the region. Idlib province, a long-standing bastion of resistance against the Assad regime, remained under the control of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This group had managed to maintain its grip on the province despite numerous offensives by Assad's forces. Despite their role in toppling Assad, HTS remained a controversial group, with links to extremist ideologies. Their strict interpretation of Islamic law and their methods had alienated many potential allies, both within Syria and internationally. Their presence in Idlib raised concerns within the international community about the potential for the region to become a haven for terrorism. The fear was that Idlib could turn into a breeding ground for extremist activities, further destabilizing the region. Adding to the complexity, remnants of ISIS, though significantly weakened, continued to operate in the eastern part of the country, exploiting the instability and lack of central authority to regroup and launch sporadic attacks. These remnants posed a persistent threat, capable of disrupting any attempts at stabilization. Their presence served as a stark reminder of the threat of extremism that continued to plague Syria. The scars left by ISIS were deep, and their ideology still found fertile ground in the chaos. The fragmented nature of Syria posed a significant challenge to the prospects of peace and stability. The divisions were not just territorial but also deeply rooted in ethnic, religious, and political differences. Reconciling the competing interests of these various factions, each vying for power and influence, would be a Herculean task. The path to peace was fraught with obstacles as each group had its own vision for Syria's future. The international community faced the daunting challenge of navigating this complex web of alliances and rivalries in their efforts to broker a lasting peace. The stakes were high, and the world watched closely, hoping for a resolution that would bring an end to the suffering and pave the way for a new beginning in Syria. Section 4. The International Stage Reactions and Interests. The downfall of the Assad regime sent shockwaves through the international community, prompting a flurry of reactions and revealing the complex geopolitical interests at play in the region. The sudden power vacuum created a sense of urgency among global leaders, each grappling with the potential consequences for their own national interests and regional stability. Turkey, with its long border with Syria and fears of Kurdish expansion, reacted swiftly. The Turkish government, led by President Erdogan, viewed the situation as both a threat and an opportunity to assert its influence in the region. The Turkish government, wary of the SDF's aspirations for autonomy, launched a drone strike in a Kurdish-held area, killing 11 civilians, including 6 children. This action drew international condemnation but underscored Turkey's determination to prevent the establishment of a Kurdish state along its border. While condemning Assad's actions and celebrating his departure, the United States found itself in a precarious position. The U.S. had to balance its strategic interests in the region with its commitment to human rights and democratic principles. The U.S. had long supported the SDF in their fight against ISIS, but their alliance with the Kurdish group strained relations with Turkey, a NATO ally. This delicate balancing act required careful diplomacy to maintain the coalition against ISIS while managing the fallout with Turkey. The U.S. called for a peaceful transition of power and emphasized the need to address the humanitarian crisis. American officials highlighted the importance of international cooperation in providing aid to the millions of displaced Syrians and rebuilding the war-torn nation. Russia, Assad's long-standing ally and military backer, faced a delicate situation. The Kremlin had invested significant resources in supporting Assad, and his downfall posed a direct challenge to Russian influence in the Middle East. The future of its military bases in Syria, crucial for projecting Russian influence in the region, was now uncertain. These bases had been a cornerstone of Russia's strategy to maintain a foothold in the Mediterranean and exert power in the region. Despite granting Assad refuge, the Kremlin remained tight-lipped about its long-term plans for Syria. Russian President Vladimir Putin faced the challenge of navigating the post-Assad landscape while preserving Russia's strategic interests. Other international actors, including Iran, Israel, and various European nations, closely watched the unfolding events in Syria, each with their own set of interests and concerns. The shifting dynamics in Syria had the potential to reshape alliances and rivalries across the Middle East and beyond. Iran, with its vested interests in maintaining its influence in Syria and supporting its Hezbollah allies, viewed the situation with apprehension. The potential loss of a key ally in Assad, threatened to weaken Iran's strategic position in the region. Israel, primarily concerned with preventing the consolidation of Iranian-backed forces along its border, remained on high alert, conducting airstrikes against Syrian military positions it deemed threatening. The Israeli government emphasized its right to defend its borders and prevent hostile forces from gaining a foothold near its territory. The international community, grappling with the complexities of the Syrian crisis, faced the daunting task of finding common ground and coordinating their efforts to prevent further bloodshed and facilitate a peaceful transition. The United Nations played a central role in these efforts, calling for dialogue and cooperation among all parties involved. Section 5. A humanitarian catastrophe, the scars of war. While the world focused on the political ramifications of Assad's fall, the Syrian people grappled with the devastating humanitarian consequences of the long and brutal conflict. Years of relentless bombing, shelling and fighting had left the country in ruins. Cities lay in rubble, their once vibrant streets now scarred with the remnants of war. The human cost was immeasurable. Over 500,000 Syrians had perished in the conflict, victims of violence, disease and starvation. Millions more had been displaced, forced to flee their homes in search of safety and refuge. Neighboring countries, already grappling with their own challenges, struggled to cope with the influx of refugees. The humanitarian crisis in Syria was a stark reminder of the devastating toll of conflict. Years of fighting had decimated the country's infrastructure, crippled its economy, and shattered its social fabric. The healthcare system was in shambles, unable to provide even the most basic medical care to the population. The international community faced an urgent moral imperative to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. Providing humanitarian aid, rebuilding infrastructure, and supporting the millions of displaced Syrians were crucial steps towards addressing the catastrophic consequences of the conflict.